Batman is both man and legend, a human hero whose mortal status has captivated the imaginations and aspirations of readers for decades, but an idea that transcends those limits into a modern mythic figure. The intersection of these two ideas lies in the midst of writer and artist Frank Miller's grandiose dystopic future superhero fable, The Dark Knight Returns. Since its publication in 1986 as a 4-issue miniseries, created by the team of writer and penciler Frank Miller, inker Klaus Janson, and colorist Lynn Varley, The Dark Knight Returns has remained one of the most influential and highly discussed superhero comics. From its bold, chaotic art style to its reframing of Batman through a harsher, more modern approach to characterization, there can be many lenses through which The Dark Knight Returns can be viewed. However, the essence of Miller's series is the mythic ascension of man to legend, and what this apotheosis means for both the hero himself and the society that surrounds him. The Dark Knight Returns is set in the distant future, but one that is clearly a reflection of the 80s era that it was created in, catching up with a 55-year-old Bruce Wayne who has been retired from the role of Batman for a decade, spurred on by the death of Jason Todd, aka Robin, in The Line of Duty. But with Gotham in disarray and crime worse than ever, Bruce takes on the mantle of the Bat once again, rebirthed in a fit of obsession that is almost completely out of his control. Back on the prowl in a world that is harsher than ever, Batman takes on Two-Face, the brutal gang known as the Mutants, the Joker, and the US government-backed Superman, who seeks to take down the Dark Knight for a nation that is increasingly hostile to vigilantes. Miller originally came up with the idea in the wake of being mugged, and, when combined with the notion of a Batman who was older than himself at the time, 29, the tale of The Dark Knight Returns quickly unfolded. Here, within a cruel and terrifying future, the notion of Batman's heroism, given a darker, more violent sheen by Miller, shines brightly. Speaking on Batman, Miller noted, "He's interesting because he straightens the world out, and he brings order to a very chaotic world. Especially when you're a child, you need somebody, even if it's a fictional character, to tell you that the world makes sense and that the good guys can win. That's what these heroes are for." The central narrative of Batman coming out of retirement and sparking a revolution in a cruel world drives forward each of these issues, with Bruce Wayne fighting for justice through a seemingly hopeless war. However, while the narrative of an old but extremely dangerous Batman hunted by both police and the army has the shape of a tragedy on its exterior, and tracks that rise and fall of its central character in such a manner, it actually accomplishes the opposite. Through its continual escalation, taking Batman from first fighting small-time crooks to eventually going toe-to-toe with Superman, Miller transforms the Dark Knight into a living, breathing myth. When juxtaposed with Miller's Batman Year One, which he would create a year later thanks to the success of TDKR, this future-set story seems even more grandiose in comparison to that restrained, tightly focused origin story. When read in chronological publication order, the duology of The Dark Knight Returns and Year One illustrate Miller's increasingly strong grasp on the essence of Batman, moving from baroque, hyper-violent vigilante to vulnerable, relatable human. When read in the order of character timeline, we see the ascension of Bruce Wayne from an obsessed young man to an idea that transcends human frailty through sheer force of will. The blend of man and myth is intrinsic to Batman, making him both relatable and aspirational. To quote Miller, "Batman turns me back into that guy who is scared, and at the same time the guy who can come and save him. It's a perfect myth." Across the pages of TDKR, Miller tracks a continual pattern of rise and fall regarding his hero, each time pushing the boundaries of the human body and the heightened nature of the world he lives in. Although Batman takes worse and worse beatings as the series progresses, his durability and strength seem to increase exponentially. Even from its start, Wayne is empowered by something beyond human capabilities. During his first in-costume appearance in the series, Wayne muses to himself, "This should be agony. I should be a mass of aching muscle, broken, spent, unable to move. And were I an older man, I surely would be. But I'm a man of 30, of 20 again. The rain on my chest is a baptism. I'm born again." That's just one example of the thunderous, arch dialogue that fills the hundreds of captions contained in every issue. Characters often speak, and most certainly think, in grandiose, sweeping speeches, highlighting the mythic narrative style of the miniseries. While that style of writing would be put to continued use by Miller in such stories as Sin City and 300, comics like Year One and Born Again show that the author could still write in a more restrained manner, illustrating his dialogue here as a choice that pairs well with both narrative scope and artistic style. Miller's story is absolutely filled to the brim with dozens of panels covering each page, overwhelming the reader with information and characters. Frequently, these panels represent the talking heads on TV that comment on Batman and give insights into the failing society informing this dystopic story. Not only does this choice solidify the chaotic, overwhelming nature of future Gotham, but these countless news anchors act to some degree as a Greek chorus, standing in for the collective voice often used in ancient plays to comment on the action and give audiences better understanding of the story's themes. Once again, this stylistic decision pushes the comic further toward myth and away from reality. In contrast to these continually chaotic panel layouts, Miller and Janson set aside multiple moments in each issue for giant splash pages that are almost all totally focused on Batman during an iconic display of strength. These leap out from each of the 40-plus page issues, contrasting against an avalanche of panels to further highlight the mythic figure of Batman as the hero reasserts himself in this grim future. Often, Batman looks as terrifying as he does heroic, as Miller himself stated that he, quote, wanted to bring back that hearty sense of malice that he had in his origin. Interestingly, Miller and Janson's art becomes rougher and wilder as the series progresses. The smooth and sleek Batman of the first issue eventually turns into a heavily lined and wrinkled man by the final installment. Whether it's completely deliberate or due to the effects of deadline pressures, these alterations in illustration create a visual progression that highlights the increasingly ravaged and desperate nature of the hero as the stakes get higher and higher. Colorist Lynn Varley's watercolor work depicts a cold and burnt-out future, bathing the Dark Knight and his world in shadows for a grim, perpetual night. In the years since its publication, Miller's story has been the source of inspiration for comics, TV shows, and films alike, each taking specific pieces, but not the whole. Perhaps the very notion of the end of a hero is enough to continually capture the imagination of audiences and creators who seek to put their own spin on the story. In addition, the series and its seminal moments have sparked numerous debates, ranging from whether Batman could defeat Superman, it doesn't matter, to whether Bruce Wayne is a fascist, a reading more informed by Miller's later work than the miniseries itself. Even Miller himself has been tempted to return to the TDKR world, resulting in the hot mess of The Dark Knight Strikes Again, the mind-bogglingly bad All-Star Batman and Robin, and the who even cares anymore of Dark Knight 3. However, these discussions, adaptations, and sequels miss the central idea that influences these many other extraneous points. The idea that, by its end, Bruce Wayne has turned himself into something more than a man, almost completely through willpower alone. This struggle is modern apotheosis, the divinification of a man. Only rather than the ancient Roman struggle of Heracles or the self-declaration of Caesar, the apotheotic process of Batman takes place in a dark and dangerous urban battleground. That blending of arch-myth and cyberpunk should be familiar to longtime readers of Miller, who employed similar genre mashing in Ronin, Sin City, and even his original script for RoboCop 2 of all things. It's not exactly subtle, and that bit of bombastic myth-making can ring blatant and bludgeoning if this isn't your type of Batman story. The transformation from man to living myth is a progression, but can be marked by a major moment within each of the 4 issues. During the first, also titled The Dark Knight Returns, we see Bruce relive his parents' death and reclaim his place as Batman after a decade of living a quiet but unfulfilled life. The result is a hero who must reassert himself in a vicious world. This leads him into conflict with the mutant gang and its vicious leader in The Dark Knight Triumphant, where the hero is brutally beaten down during his conflict. Near death, Wayne reconfirms his identity with the help of young Carrie Kelly, who has claimed the identity of Robin in an effort to find her own strength in this bleak world. Combined with the loss of his older, brighter costume, Batman returns darker and more vicious, brutally beating the mutant leader in front of his gang. But the return of Batman sparks the resurrection of the Joker as well, who awakens from a near vegetative state at the sight of his old foe, coming to a head in Hunt the Dark Knight. Here, we find Batman and Robin in peak form, but greatly tested by Joker's deadly rampage. Their confrontation ends with the hero bleeding out and the Joker dead. Batman's defeat of his nemesis sees the hero break the villain's neck to paralyze but not kill him, but the Joker ends his own life. Issue 3 concludes on likely the darkest note in the series, as Batman's great trial leaves him in a terrible state and at the risk of capture, setting up his potential tragic end in the aptly titled The Dark Knight Falls. Here, the story hits its bleakest beats with nuclear fallout blanketing Gotham and leading to a final physical confrontation between Batman and Superman. Beyond Two-Face, beyond evolved criminal gangs, beyond the horror of the Joker, the most seemingly insurmountable hurdle between Batman the Man and Batman the Legend is Superman. And in fighting the godlike hero, Bruce Wayne gains his own form of godhood. Of course, putting Superman in such a position required a rather controversial reworking of the hero that most fans disagree with. And if this includes you, you're not alone. Miller himself said the narrative choice required casting Superman in a, quote, very questionable role as a government stooge. And while the Dark Knight asserts himself over his opponent, he quickly dies of a heart attack. But in this most literal instance of the death-rebirth cycle, we learn that the hero has faked his demise, moving underground to train the next generation of heroes. In its culmination, we see how Bruce Wayne has transformed himself from a worn-out older man at peace with death into a living legend whose powerful myth will inform generations to come. Like the character of Batman in our culture, Bruce Wayne himself has become timeless. And while the return of Batman to the streets of Gotham has resulted in chaos quelled and criminals thwarted, the reassertion of the very idea of Batman is what spells the greatest hope for the future. The myth of Batman reverberates stronger and stronger throughout time, both across the decades between the original publication of The Dark Knight Returns and now, and within the very story itself. And in becoming a living, breathing myth, the legend of Batman will never die.